Mental Health, the Up&Up. We're trying to make mental health care clear, helpful, and maybe even fun. We're chatting with licensed therapists, but this is not therapy. These are simply thoughts and ideas for you to discuss with your own therapist and to help you on your journey of complete wellness. Hi, and welcome back to Mental Health, the Up&Up. I am Anna, your host, and we're here to talk about mental health stuff. We're going to talk about a little bit of everything. We have a fun topic for today. I'm here with Geraldine Peterson, licensed mental health counselor.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Geraldine Peterson. I'm a therapist. The license says counselor, but I think there's a difference between counseling and therapy. Today, I wanted to talk about sleep and insomnia. So many people have trouble with that. Yes.
Me.
Oh, you have trouble with it? You're saying you have trouble with it? I get it. Anna was raising her hand, yeah.
I was
Was there
just
like,
telling
you have
my
something to say?
husband. I was just telling my husband yesterday, I'm like, I've been sleeping really heavy, like through the night, and it feels really weird. I don't know what to do with this. I don't know if this is a better place or a worse place right now.
Uh-huh.
So,
Actually, even though we didn't practice that, that's a perfect setup. So I'm going to kind of break this sleep concept into three areas, and one is just information about sleep that a lot of people don't know, like what do you do about deep sleep? One is sleep hygiene, which is a term a lot of people have heard and a lot of therapists talk about, or if you go somewhere for advice, they'll talk to you about sleep hygiene.
see, that's a new one for me.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Well, it'll be exciting to talk about then. I'm so tempted to get derailed before I say the third thing.
I'm so good at that for you.
We're good at that for each other.
Yes.
The third thing would be parts of a visualization if the sleep hygiene isn't quite enough, or you've done the sleep hygiene and are still not able to fall asleep. Things to do that are helpful regardless actually of whether you fall asleep. It should help you fall asleep, but even if you don't fall asleep, it's going to help your brain get some rest. So
should we start with just the general info about sleep?
yeah. Okay, so one thing is that, Anna, are you an early bird or a night owl?
Night owl, 100%.
Well, I'm not good with numbers, but people who study sleep, I don't know that there's a particular name for them, have identified actually 7, not 2, I believe it's 7, patterns of sleep. So night owl, early bird, the kind of siesta type of sleep where you're a night owl, an early bird, and then you take a siesta in the afternoon, and then you're a night owl, an early bird, and take a siesta. And honestly, I'm not real familiar with what the others are, but the piece of information I think that's helpful for people to know is that if you don't fit into one of the categories, just pick another category. I know someone who's, I don't know what to call it, but maybe a reverse siesta. She sleeps, wakes up at 2 in the morning, she's awake for a couple of hours, and then falls back asleep. So she's a night owl. No, she's goes to bed early and wakes up late, but she's got 2 hours of productive time in the middle of the night. Yeah, so it's about not trying to fit yourself into a box, instead of figuring out what works for you, and as much as you can building your life around that.
So I actually have 2 thoughts now to share. The first is that the person who studies sleep is a somnologist. I Googled.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And the second was, when you're talking about different sleep patterns, I heard a theory from a layman. This is not an official theory.
Well, a theory can be from anyone because it's just a theory.
Indeed.
Okay, go ahead.
I heard this theory that part of the neurodivergence quirks that we see, like, for example, ADHD,
Uh-huh.
ADHD people tend to have insomnia as we understand it.
Ah,
And that's because they were the people genetically who were the night watch when we were all living in camps being hunter gatherers. So
a
that was the
hundred
theory I heard.
percent. So somnologists agree with your theory, Anna.
Oh, well, that sounds
Yes,
cool.
the explanation, the theoretical explanation that they've come up with for so many types of sleep patterns is so that somebody is awake 24 hours a day
Mm,
to check out for saber-toothed tigers,
tires.
saber-toothed tigers, saber-toothed tigers attacking the camp. And I use saber-toothed tigers a lot, and I realized that technically saber-toothed tigers didn't exist, but I still like to use that
They're
analogy.
still a really cool sounding animal, even if they
Yeah,
were fake.
yeah, yeah.
Misunderstood. Let's say misunderstood.
Misunderstood. Yes. So yeah, the idea is to find that pattern that naturally works for you, which can be difficult to
Mm-hmm.
find because our world is set up in a kind of 9 to 5 pattern.
Yeah. This is one of the side effects of the Industrial Revolution in a lot of ways is that since we've been relegated to doing life on this very specific pattern in order to get the things done in the factory and in the cities, our natural biorhythms tend to get overridden a lot,
Hmm.
including sleep.
Yeah. Um, I want to go off on the Industrial Revolution and what it did to people.
I'll make a
Um,
note. That'll be next podcast.
yeah. um, the way they figure out people's natural sleep patterns,
Mm-hmm.
and if you're able to do this, go right ahead, but is to put them in a cave deep underground so that they have no access to light, the changes in the sun rising or setting, or noises or anything like that. And also have a team of people to track them and to vary their work cycle so that they also they can't kind of monitor time based on who's on schedule,
Mm.
Eh, super complicated. Yeah, I
Sensory
don't,
deprivation to find your natural biorhythms?
kind of, yeah.
Okay.
They've found that the 24-hour sleep cycle is pretty ingrained in
Mm-hmm.
people. Um, Actually, it's a little bit longer than that. They're not sure why. It's like 24 to 25 hours, but yeah, it stays pretty close to that. Um, and that's how they've kind of figured out these, 7 different patterns of sleep that people just naturally do.
Yeah.
Um, the other pattern that happens in sleep is that most people have heard of REM sleep or deep sleep,
Yeah.
um, light sleep. Everybody has a pattern of those, and we have about 4 to 7 or 8 per night.
Mm. Okay.
So it's also helpful to know that pattern to see what yours is. Mine happens to be about 55 minutes where I'll go to light sleep, and that's a little short, um, like on
On the
average.
average, yeah.
Yeah, it's when people talk about averages, most people seem to interpret that as like a goal to be right, and it's not. It's like height. There's
This
nothing.
this
Yeah.
this has been one of my high horses. Having worked so much with children and child development, is
Ah,
oh, but they're below average or they're above average on this. The average literally is just the middle point on the range of everything it can healthily be.
yes.
They're like if you get further out on the wings, yes, we get concerned, but like
Yeah.
it's not this one defined number of your child should always be this many inches tall at 3 years old. Like it's not, or you should always weigh this many pounds at this height. Like there is a range to that.
100%. And again, that entire range is healthy and normal.
Yes.
And yes, when it goes out past a certain point, they call it, I think it's past 2 or possibly 3 standard deviations. That's when we start to get concerned.
Mm-hmm.
It's very, very rare.
Yeah,
So yeah, if your child is within that range or your sleep cycle is within that range, it's normal and healthy. It's not going to benefit me to try to get it to the middle of what
exactly.
most people have. Mine's 55 minutes.
To do so just adds extra stress on your body when you're already dealing
Right.
with 52 million other stressors.
Right.
Why
Yeah.
are we stressing about 2 points here? Anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so a couple of things about that sleep pattern is that we go from light sleep to REM sleep to deep sleep and we just go up and down to the different levels of sleep, all of which are important.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we do need that deep sleep. We can get by without it on a particular night or probably for a couple of nights. Eventually we're going to need it. But if you have light sleep, your brain is still getting benefit.
Which is really good and reassuring news for those of us who don't sleep much.
I will also say that you won't be aware of deep sleep because by the nature of it, it's deep.
Yes.
We tend to be aware of when we're in light sleep because we're in light sleep and they're like, oh, I'm kind of half asleep. When you're in deep sleep, you're not aware of it. And it's not a super long length. I think it's again average, like maybe 5 to 10 minutes per
Hmm.
cycle. So you don't need a whole lot of deep sleep. You do need it.
Yeah.
The other thing to know about that cycle, which is very interesting and will help some people with insomnia, is when you are in that stage of sleep where your brain is saying, oh, I haven't fallen asleep yet. Why can't I fall asleep? Technically is light sleep.
Hmm.
If you were hooked up to monitors like in a sleep study, it would show light sleep. You're
Interesting.
still conscious during light sleep. You're still aware. Or those times, I'm going to admit to an embarrassing truth about me. Those times when I'm like half asleep and somebody says, Mom, and they're like, oh, do I really want to answer? I'm actually asleep.
Yeah.
I can wake myself out of light sleep if somebody says, Mom, where's the grape juice? Or if someone says fire,
Yeah.
I can make that choice, but I've stopped feeling guilty about not responding because
Hmm.
I know I'm asleep.
Yeah.
I'm aware of noises around me, but that doesn't mean I'm not in light sleep. I am in light sleep. So one thing that people do is when they're in light sleep, they kind of talk themselves out of it. I'm not asleep yet. Oh
Mm.
my goodness, when am I going to ever fall asleep? And if
Yeah.
you can change that too, I am asleep. I'm just asleep with being aware of my anxieties, you know, but I am asleep. I'm already asleep. Nothing to worry about. I've already made it. It relieves some of that anxiety, which then can help us move forward rather than wake ourselves up by saying, oh, God damn it, I'm not asleep yet. Excuse my language.
That is really, really interesting because I was trying to explain to someone recently that I conscious sleep 90% of the time.
Ah, uh-huh.
Which now that you say that, it's like, oh, okay, then I just spend most of my time in light sleep. Because
Mm-hmm.
I'm always aware of my body. I can't a lot of times I can't move my body because my body is in
Mm-hmm.
rest mode, but my
Mm-hmm.
brain is entirely conscious and entirely aware of my surroundings. I actually have a memory when I was a teenager. I was taking a nap and my brothers were in the living room arguing over a movie. And
Uh-huh.
this one said it was X and that one said it was Y. And I remember laying there thinking, they're both idiots. It was obviously F.
Uh-huh.
And I dragged myself out of bed, walked into the living room to correct them, and said something. I'm not sure what. And they
Uh-huh.
both looked at me and said, what did you say? And I said, I don't know. And I went back to bed. But I was conscious enough to be aware of their conversation, but I couldn't make my body respond, be vocal.
Yeah.
And it was a very
So,
interesting situation.
yeah, that is, again, you are asleep.
Yeah.
Technically, that would be considered sleepwalking. I once
Interesting.
had uh, someone, I was asleep and they came in and asked me to pick up donuts that day.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a long story, but and bring them to their work.
Yeah.
And so I got to their work. They're like, "Where are the donuts?" And they're like, well, "What are you talking about?" And they're like, "I asked you to bring in donuts. You clearly said yes, I will. I'll stop at this donut shop and I'll bring it." I totally
Right.
don't remember that conversation. So consciousness kind of gets played around with when you're asleep.
Hmm.
The One of the big things that I think are helpful for people who have insomnia is similar to what you just said. You don't get enough sleep, or you don't get a lot of sleep. You do get a
Hmm.
lot of sleep. You're just conscious as you're getting it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you probably do get more sleep than you realize. You've just convinced yourself that that's not sleep because you're aware of your body.
Right.
And that's not a condition of sleep.
Interesting. Okay. Good to know.
When people um, are consciously aware and can't move their bodies, that's also very common in different stages of sleep.
Hmm.
When you're consciously aware and you can't move your body and you panic about it, that also has a name that's eluding me right now. It's not night terrors, but it's something similar to that. Sleep paralysis.
Sleep
Yeah.
paralysis.
Yeah. And again, that's normal. You shouldn't be able to move your body when conscious effort when you're
Hmm.
asleep. And again, because we're conscious and we're there, like uh, either through a dream or something that's happening in reality, a lion's chasing us or someone's knocking at the door and we can't move our body and then we panic.
Hmm.
They call that sleep paralysis, but it's actually very normal.
Okay.
And if you have that information, then you're less likely to panic if it happens to you.
Yeah.
And I suppose technically it would be called sleep paralysis if you're not worried about it. It just doesn't come to the attention of people because people don't complain about it if they're not worried
Right.
about it.
I always figured I'm supposed to be sleeping. My body is doing its rest cycle and is refusing to move, so I'm
Yeah,
good. So
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
So another thing about that cycle that can be helpful is that if you wake up during a deep sleep, you're going to be groggy. Those are the days that we wake up and where they're like, oh, I know I got X number of hours of sleep. Why am I so tired?
Hmm.
Versus the times we wake up and the alarm goes off and we don't even bother hitting the snooze bar. It's just like, oh, time to get up and we're awake.
Yeah.
That happens because the alarm happens to match with a light sleep stage or the alarm happens to match with a deep sleep stage.
Hmm.
So if you can figure out your pattern well enough that your alarm goes off when you're probably going to be in a light sleep stage, it's going to work way better for you.
Hmm.
Um, it's because it's difficult to test or to figure out exactly when we actually fall asleep, and some nights are different. It's pretty hard to do. I have one thing I use that you can find all over the place. Oh, I can't remember what they're called. But it's if I set my alarm for like 8 o'clock, at 7:30, birds start chirping and the light
Mm.
bulb turns on
Hmm.
really dimly and it kind of mimics sunrise.
Yeah.
So throughout that half hour, the light gets brighter until by 8 o'clock the light bulb is fully on, and at 8 o'clock the birds are really loud and annoying.
My
Um,
husband's phone has that built into its alarm
oh,
function,
yeah,
actually. The screen starts to brighten about maybe 10 minutes before his alarm goes off, and it starts doing things.
yeah.
That's
And again,
interesting.
that will just pull you a little faster out of deep sleep if you happen to be in um, deep sleep, or keep you in light sleep if you
Yeah.
happen to be going in light sleep and going back down. It'll say, no, 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 the birds are chirping. It's morning. The roosters are crowing.
Okay.
So some important things to know about that cycle of sleep. Um, the other thing to know about sleep is why people sleep. And I'll tell you right now, somnologists, is that right?
Hmm. Yep.
Somnologists disagree about that at this point, and or they say we really don't know. Um, Whether this concept I'm about to talk about is true or not, I think it's helpful.
This is your theory?
This is my theory. So Um, so sleep is the time where our brain organizes everything that's happened to us throughout the day.
Mm-hmm.
So I compare it to maybe working on a project and you're pulling things out from all sorts of places. You're pulling paint out and setting it on the table that you're working on the project on. You're pulling paintbrushes from here. You're pulling, a vase that you're going to try to paint from here. You're drawing napkins from here, a glass of water, all these things to help you make this painting.
Yeah.
And then after you're done painting, you put all those things away, and some things you go, why do I keep my paintbrushes over here? I should keep them by the paint. So, and this has nothing to do with how well you clean up after a project. This is just an example. So in sleeping, a bunch of things happen to us throughout the day, and then our brain kind of sorts them out and says, oh, remember to buy milk,
Mm-hmm.
or gosh, that childhood trauma still bothers me, all
Yeah.
the way from one to the other. And
Yeah.
our brain says, childhood trauma, well, I did some work on that or talked to someone about that, or I can think about that a different way. So I'm not going to file it in this section. All dogs are terrifying because I was bit by a dog as a child. I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
file it a little differently, where I was a child and I didn't have the capacity to recognize when a dog was aggressive or not. So I'm going to file it a little differently, or file it in the same place, or file it a little deeper. So our brain kind of works out where we're going to file all those things, which is also why dreams can be so confusing and seem very stream of consciousness,
Yes.
because it would be just like after you're doing a project on a table, if you just kind of grabbed a handful of stuff, none of those belong in the same place.
Mm-hmm.
But our brains do like to make stories out of things and make things make sense.
Yeah.
So our brain will get those 17 concepts that it's trying to figure out where to put and say, well, let's make a story out of these.
Yeah.
So
Being a child of the 90s,
uh-huh.
the metaphor that makes sense to me that I've always gone to is my brain is defragmenting. It's going
Yeah,
through that,
yeah.
that monthly cycle that you're supposed to do with your computers where you take all the data and fix it. You put it where it
Uh-huh.
belongs
Is
so that you
defragging
can.
still a thing? I love that
So
analogy.
it's less of a thing. You can
Uh-huh.
still do it on a PC, but as a rule, because they changed the way hard drives function, you don't have to manually do it. It does it itself.
Gotcha. Yeah, because I remember manually doing that
Yeah.
as well. I love that analogy. Um, if you're younger than a child of the 90s and you can come up with a different analogy, I'd love to hear that. I still say broken record technique. And yesterday, I passed a car whose brakes light were out, and I asked them to roll down the window by rolling my hand around like you've manually
Yep.
used to roll down windows in cars. And I don't even know, don't even think they make them that way. And the ones that have that are so old. But they understood me.
Right. Yeah.
So anyway, that's kind of some information about sleep that I think is helpful and important to know, is just about,
Definitely.
mostly it's information about lowering our anxiety when we tend to think there's something wrong with the pattern of sleep that we seem to want or we're experiencing.
Mm-hmm.
So even regardless of that information, if you sleep a certain way that just works for you, rather than talking to yourself about how abnormal that is, or it's not in the average range, or that's not a night owl or an early bird, or all these labels. If it
Mm-hmm.
works for you, it works for you. Um,
Definitely.
and most things that keep us up at night, if it's not a medical thing, it's anxiety. It's those anxious thoughts saying, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with this? Why can't I
Yeah.
sleep? Why am I waking up at 2 in the morning? I shouldn't be waking up at 2 in the morning. Well, apparently you should be waking up at 2 in the morning.
Yeah.
So to adjust that. So,
It's actually super helpful even in this post-industrial age
Uh-huh.
Because if you figure out what your natural biorhythms are and your natural sleep cycles are, you can actually use that in your hunt for a job and for your
Ah.
extracurricular activities,
Mm-hmm.
um, to make life work around how your body needs to function.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I like that idea. Again, if it's possible. And also, if you work from home and you're productive between 2 in the morning and 4 in the morning,
mm-hmm.
go for it.
Yeah.
You reminded me of one other piece of information about sleep, and that has to do with changing sleep cycles. Like if you go from a day shift to an afternoon shift, or an afternoon shift to a night shift, or a day shift to a night shift, which sounds like you're moving backwards,
Yeah.
our bodies always adjust a little bit better if we try to lengthen the time we're awake and um, then trying to shorten the time we're awake. So if we go from working from 8 in the morning to 5 in the evening, so we're sleeping from 9 to 6,
Mm-hmm.
and we go from working from 9 to 6, it's better for us to stay awake for that long period of 24 plus 8 and
Oh,
then
I see.
sleep than to go backwards and try to say, I'm gonna work, my last day working 9 to 5, and then I'm gonna sleep for until I have to go to work at 10 p.m. Our body just tends to not want to sleep early.
It's almost
And
like overwriting the system so it can reboot.
yeah,
Again,
yeah,
too many
yeah,
computers.
yeah. And quickly, I did mention if physical conditions, there are physical conditions that cause insomnia. We're not going to cover that today, and I'm not. I don't know enough to cover that, but there
Mm-hmm.
are some real specific physical conditions that that you might be experiencing if you have insomnia. So it's worth kind of looking at, and your doctor should know. Sometimes magnesium levels affect it, or actually, I'm not sure what else, but what most doctors, therapists, friends will then talk to you about if you can't sleep is sleep hygiene. And what that is basically having a consistent pattern of behavior before bedtime so that
Mm.
your brain kind of says, oh, you've done A, B, C, D, and now E is falling asleep. So sleep hygiene is nothing more than keeping that very consistent, or as consistent as you can before bed. So if it's brush your teeth, put on your PJs, do 10 jumping jacks and then go to bed, always do it in that order. If it's do 10 jumping jacks and then brush your teeth and then whatever else I said, always do it in that order. Putting on your PJs, that's what it was. Always do it in that order before you go to bed. And our brain learns super well like that.
Okay.
And everybody who drives a car knows this, because we all have our patterns of getting into a car, and we know some people put on their seatbelt first and then adjust their seat, or turn on the car. I turn on the car and then I put on my seatbelt, and it just becomes very automatic. And I never forget anything because I do it in the same way
Hmm.
every time. So there's a lot of things involved in sleep hygiene, a lot of details in it, but basically it's doing the same thing in the same pattern at night. So your body kind of naturally fills in that, oh, now you're going to go to sleep.
Okay.
There are many people who have all that information and who do sleep hygiene and still suffer from insomnia. So I want to talk real quickly about the components of a visualization exercise or a thinking exercise to do that will help even if you've done the sleep hygiene. You look super excited. What are you thinking, Anna?
I'm thinking of Mind Palaces from Sherlock.
Ah, yeah. So it's, yeah, same kind of concept.
Okay.
So I'm going to ask you, Anna, what do you hear or what do you think of for like kind of off the cuff, quick, you can't sleep, you should do this? what
The
comes to
standard
mind?
one is counting sheep.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
Count backwards from 100.
Yep.
There's a lot of
Which
kind
they
of
do
like,
when you're going under anesthesia.
uh-huh. And again, well, I'll get to that in a minute. There's also a lot of things, a lot of pieces of advice like, well, why don't you just stop worrying? Or why don't you just fall
Just close
asleep?
your eyes. Just be
Yeah.
asleep.
So a lot of the advice is about things that either we're already doing
Mm-hmm.
or things that we know we need to do. We just don't have the steps to do them.
Yeah.
So because most of our inability to fall asleep has to do with some sort of anxiety or some sort of response to a pattern that's saying stay awake rather than fall asleep. It's often helpful to have a visualization or a thought pattern that has 4 pieces to it that can help you fall asleep, or regardless as to whether you fall asleep, it's going to help you get some rest anyway.
Okay.
So one of the concepts about counting sheep is repetition. Repetition or boredom, things
Okay.
that just our brain does over and over again and gets bored with. So that's one component. What are you thinking?
I'm thinking that boredom usually spurs creativity, which doesn't sound restful to me, but keep going.
And it does. Boredom does spur that. It's not going to happen immediately. The reason why that, one of the reasons why that works is that it kind of fuels your dreams, which is where
Okay.
you're more than welcome to be very creative. And a lot of people wake up in the morning with aha moments. Oh, I know that how to write that poem, or I know what I want to do, to organize my kitchen, or I've, cured cancer. Probably
Right.
not that dramatic, but that idea of boredom being um, spurring that kind of creativity
Okay.
falls right into the sleep pattern. We
Hmm.
are creative in our dreams. So repetition is one. The other part of it is any kind of downward pattern. So if we count sheep, the sheep should be running away from us, not towards us.
Hmm.
If we count, we should be counting down, not counting up. And it's very, if I just use counting as an example, I can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's really hard to go 5, 4, 3, 2. I want to go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Okay.
My voice is going down. My volume's going down. When the numbers go down, my body kind of falls in line and says, oh,
Hmm.
we're going down.
Okay.
Everything that can go downward is going to go downward. So if you are doing numbers, high to low. If you're doing sheep, close to far. Anything that has that downward idea. There's a children's book, Goodnight Moon, that every page, as you turn the page, the colors are more muted. So that
Oh,
by the last, I know it's interesting, by the
they
last
actually
page,
did psychology to make that story? Oh my
yeah,
goodness.
yeah. And it does help. So it's repetitious and
I
it's
feel
going
slightly
downward.
manipulated by little now.
All the time, Anna, all the time. So
But
you
that makes
want to
sense, yeah.
be, yeah. So you want to be repetitious.
Hmm.
You want it to be boring. So
Okay.
repetitious without being boring is going to be a little too creative. So repetitious, you want it to be boring and you want it to go downhill.
Mm.
The fourth component is the component that most people leave out, and that is you want to have somewhere to leave your anxieties. Um, so there's this, like if I said to you, Anna, don't think of blueberries. There's a famous saying, I think it's a white rhinoceros. Anna, don't think about a white rhinoceros. It's impossible to not start thinking about a white rhinoceros.
Yeah.
So at nighttime when we say, don't be anxious, our brain will go like, oh, anxious, I heard that word. I'll start being anxious. So
Anxious? Anxious about what? You mean this thing and that thing and that thing and that thing? Yeah. Yeah.
exactly, yeah. So to not try to stop your anxiety, But to say, if you're already thinking about that white rhinoceros, that may not stop. That's going to keep coming up. But if I say every time you think about that white rhinoceros, think about a puppy dog. You're going to go, white rhinoceros, oh, puppy dog. It's a little bit fun. And eventually the white rhinoceros will fade into the background because you're thinking about puppy dogs. So the idea isn't to stop those thoughts. The idea is to have that thought and then say, oh, I'm going to set you over here and think about this instead.
Okay.
So the place to put anxieties, either through visualization or just thinking, some people have trouble visualizing, but you can do it with thinking, is again to have something repetitious, boring, and downhill. The best way I can talk about this is to give you a couple of examples and then get back to it.
Okay.
So one of my personal exercises when I'm having trouble getting to sleep is I walk down a spiral staircase in a lighthouse. And in my mind, the lighthouse just is so tall that it never has a bottom. So I'm repetitious, I'm boring, and I'm going downhill, right? And then when an anxiety comes up, I take that anxiety, I put it in a picture frame, and I hang it on the wall. And I keep walking by it. And so the important parts of that are the same three things: boring, repetitious, kind of downhill or away from you. Anything bigger to smaller, closer to farther, and containment. So the picture frame is actually an important part of that. It's like, you're staying here. I'm moving on. You're over here.
Yeah.
I keep walking. Another anxiety comes up. Put it in a picture frame. Hang it on the wall. Keep walking. If the anxiety from 10 steps ago comes up again, that's fine. Just put it in a picture frame. Hang it on the wall. So even if an anxiety comes up 10 times, you put it in a picture frame, hang it on the wall. That's going to not only help you with sleep, it's at least going to calm your brain and say to your brain, this isn't the time to think about those. And you're going to develop that pattern. So there's kind of not a real potential negative to it.
Okay.
I'm going to use a couple of other examples that some other people have told me, and I love it when I hear people come up with their own, little take on this. One person I know put it in Tupperware and put it in the fridge. So I'm not sure exactly I can't remember what the rest of the sleep thing was, but when she had a thought, she would just put it in a Tupperware container and set it in the fridge.
I like it.
Again, containment, repetitious, boring, away from her. And the part that resonated with her and the part she liked about that is that she could still see it and access it. Because for her anxiety would rise if she actually put it in a box and then couldn't see it. Her anxieties would kind of go like, oh, what if I need to remember a saber-toothed tiger might attack? Right. So that the Tupperware was clear was an important part of her process. Another one is having your anxieties walk the plank. Again, repetitious, boring, downhill, and contained. You're not on my boat. You're in the ocean.
Is contained our fourth point?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I forgot to write it down. I'm just making sure.
Yeah.
I was writing them as we went to make sure we hit them. Okay.
So I have one person, like you had mentioned before, mind palace, and that's a technique Sherlock Holmes uses. Other people have used it too, or I guess Arthur Conan Doyle uses. And that's like if to store memories and information, to have a place, a visualization of a place in your brain. Yeah. So that if you're trying to remember something, you say, I'm going to look behind this door and it will be there, or I'm going to look in this cupboard and it will be there. Yeah. And again, that visualization triggers then a pattern for our brain to say, oh yeah, remember something.
A friend and I, were discussing mind palaces, and hers ended up almost being an entire little English village
Ah,
because she had so many trains, she needed a train station for them. But she also
ah,
needed a quiet place to get away from them so she could sleep. So we made a pub where she could go and sit
I
with the
love
fire and a
it.
cup of tea or a beer or whatever
I
you want to get in a pub.
Actually, a train would be also a great kind of repetitious, boring, away from
Yep.
you place for her anxieties. If she could just toss a box onto the next train car, or have someone, uh, a train hopper. I don't know what they're called, but a person,
Hobos?
jump.
I don't know what the
The
politically correct term
Yeah,
is, but
I think hobo comes from Hoboken, which is a city. But anyway,
yes, it
way
is.
off topic.
Yeah.
So yeah, someone jump on that train and kind of speed away. But you want to make it personal.
Yeah.
Um, I, Another example, what a lot of people use is things like shelves or boxes, and you've heard the term, shelve that idea,
Mm-hmm.
or let's
Put a
box that
cork in
up.
it.
Oh my goodness. If you're a wine connoisseur, I would love that. Oh my goodness. So you put your thought in a bottle of wine, cork it, and put it in that wine cellar, which is always a cellar. It's never a wine attic.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I love that idea. So again, if that thought comes up again, it's it's no different than a new worry. You still sometimes you want to have 10 of the same wines.
Yeah.
Still put it in a wine bottle, put a cork in it, put it in the cellar.
Yeah.
Um, uh, I have a one example I have is someone who would put their thoughts in boxes and then push them to the back of their brain, kind of like you would push things to the back of a closet that you're not going to use.
Yeah.
Um, However, her technique for having them not come out again is to fill the boxes with puppies so that her anxieties are busy playing with the puppies
Ah.
and wouldn't bother her again. Because would you, if you had the option, Anna, of annoying someone or playing with puppies, wouldn't you pick playing with puppies?
The puppies win every time.
So, and that's just an example of personalizing it.
Mm-hmm.
If you hate puppies, that wouldn't work for you. Or if
True.
you don't care about puppies, that wouldn't work for you. If you're a football player, you know, write your worry on a football and throw the football far down the field. And you're supposed to be doing that, practicing football anyway, and try to make it into the barrel, um, but anything that kind of speaks to you, or is familiar to you, that's going to work a little better.
Yeah.
And you're going to like it better. So that visualization piece, to include that anxiety, contain that anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
So if you were throwing footballs down a football field, I would either visualize, I know sometimes they have like a ring or something that you're trying to get the football into
Mm-hmm.
to contain it. Or it could even be like the 20-yard line. All the footballs go past that 20-yard line and they're contained beyond that 20-yard line. But some concept of containment,
Okay.
some repetition, some boredom, and some downward or far or smaller concept. Even if there's not a way that the containing the anxieties won't work, because by the nature of repetition and boredom and downward, that's what your brain needs to rest. So your
Mm-hmm.
brain is going to benefit just from that repetition. Even if you don't believe you're falling asleep, or even if you don't technically fall asleep, that repetition is going to kind of free up the rest of your brain to do the work that it needs to do, that we do when we're asleep.
Hmm.
So those are some information, and then a little bit on sleep hygiene, and then a kind of process, visualization or just thinking process that usually helps us fall asleep. But even if it doesn't help us fall asleep, it creates a pattern. It creates the situation in our brain that is so similar to sleep that the rest of our brain can kind of put all those project pieces away.
Yeah.
That's my kind of, I think, what helps most people with insomnia. as I'm talking right now, I keep thinking of different things that you can use for that downward thing. And I just saw the plant behind me that's downward, and I'm thinking like, oh, you could like,
Vines.
yeah, vines crawling, going downward, or, um, a lot of like ideas of like putting things away. Another one I use is actually a file cabinet. Um,
Mm,
when you were talking about the village, that came to mind because the village keeps going big is big.
yeah.
My file cabinet, it's not a mind castle. It's not a castle. It's a file cabinet, but
Hmm.
it can go on forever. It can contain everything, and there's always that file in there. I started summing up and then got distracted with all the little things looking around. Oh, it could be this. It could be a roll of tape. It could be just looking at uh, my
One of
desk behind
the
me.
one of the physical things that I've done to help with my insomnia that follows the exact same premise is intentionally relaxing my body one piece at a time.
Uh-huh.
And I've noticed, I didn't notice till you mentioned it, but I noticed that when I start at the top of my head and work my way down, so my head, then my shoulders, then my arms, then
Mm-hmm.
my torso,
Mm-hmm.
I never make it to my feet.
Yeah.
But if I start at my feet, then
Yep.
I don't fall asleep, number one, and then I get distracted about halfway through, or I'm like I'm at my knees and I'm like, oh wait,
Yeah.
that thing over there.
Yeah.
So that's so, but again, moving downward.
Downward. Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, a lot of relaxation techniques start with your head, and a lot of energizing techniques start with your feet.
Interesting.
Yeah. It's like get grounded and now wiggle your toes and kind of, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So anything with those components, and mostly with everything we're going to talk about, what works for you is what works for you. There's a lot of things that may work for 99% of the world, and if it doesn't work for you, don't do it. And if what works for you is starting at your feet and going to your head, go ahead and do that.
Yeah.
So these are concepts that are a place to start to find your individual thing that's going to help you fall asleep and enjoy sleep. And sometime we'll have to talk about that phenomenon that happens to a lot of people when they are sleeping and they dream a joke. My goodness, that joke is so funny, and then I'll say it out loud, and it's something like red cardboard, and they're like, "That's not funny."
But it was so important in the dream. It was
Yes, yes,
hilarious.
yeah.
Yeah.
And again, that's your brain categorizing things. And yes, people sometimes do. There's kind of some famous examples of people who have written a song asleep and then woken up and written it down really quickly.
Yeah.
Sometimes they make sense, sometimes they don't. So thanks for listening, and you can find us at www.
upandupwellness.com. You can
Thank
find
you.
us here on YouTube or over here on Spotify. We're on
Uh-huh.
Facebook. Just look up and Up Wellness, and you'll see us somewhere.
All right. Take care. We'll see you next time.